Busra, Aydin,
Here.
please proceed, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and everyone who is here that cares about teacher retention. My name is Busra Aydin. I am a highly qualified teacher with a track record of effectiveness on the impact teacher evaluation system. This is my 10th year serving as an educator with DC Public Schools. I taught at 2 of the 40 lowest performing schools in Washington, DC, located in Ward 5. Both schools were Title I and served large numbers of students identified as being at risk and qualified for specialized services. I'm writing to share my experience, I'm speaking to share my experience of transferring from one DC public school to another and how I survived. During my first year of teaching, my baseline data indicated that I did not have any third grade students that were reading, writing, or solving math problems on grade level using the Go Math assessment, teacher created graded assessment, and M-Class DIBELS and text reading comprehension assessments. In order for me to earn an effective rating, my principal had the expectation that 80% of my third grade students would read and solve math on the third grade level. As a naive first year teacher, not knowing my rights, this became my teacher assessed student data. This was 25% of my overall rating as an educator. I had to be a magician to get my students who had been performing below grade level since kindergarten to perform on third grade level within 10 months of schooling with a first year teacher without any other response intervention from the local school level. I did my best. I had 2 observations by a master educator and 2 observations by my principal. 75% of my teacher evaluation scores were effective, but I was unable to meet this unrealistic teacher assessed student goal of having 80% of my students read on grade level. This resulted in me receiving a developing rating through no fault of my own. I wanted to challenge my overall rating and went to central office and was told that student achievement goals were set by the principal, so it was at his discretion. My second year teaching, my principal assigned me to teach 4th grade. I looped with the majority of my students. Having learned from my first year, I set realistic expectations for student achievement. My task goals were growth goals that were based on my baseline data. I also learned about Child Find. I had to document historical data for my students, and I began tracking Tier 2 interventions I provided in the classroom, recorded student response to those interventions, and prior to the middle of the year checkpoint, I referred 5 students to the student support team with all of the data needed to begin the eligibility process for students who had been performing far below proficient since kindergarten. I would email our LEA to follow up, copying my principal, and would not get any feedback. I finally went to my principal and I said, I'm concerned about my students, and I have not heard back from our LEA. He said, don't worry, Miss Aydin, she won't be coming back next year. It was at that moment that I realized this school was not going to be the right fit for me. Not only was our principal aware of the fact that the person responsible was not doing their job, but he was enabling them to remain in their current position without consequences. I realized that I had to be a member of a school that was invested in growing their learners and improving outcomes. My impact principal observation scores dropped drastically, and I was being rated in the developing category. My students met their growth goals by the end of the year. And if it had not been for the 2 master educator impact observations that contradicted my principal's rating, my end of the year was going to be developing once again. I had enough, and I was determined not to return to this school, even if this meant I would be unemployed. I had to think about how I could continue to help the students I was leaving behind. I decided to email the superintendent and request a meeting with reinforcements from the Washington Teachers Union field representative. I shared all of the documentation I had with the superintendent and said, if any one of the 5 students I referred find a parent advocate and sue DCPS, they will win. He said he would not share his staffing decisions with me, but thanked me for the information I shared. My experience as a 3rd and 4th grade teacher in high need schools helped me realize I wanted to be an early childhood educator so that I could build a strong foundation and catch children before they fall. I attended a transfer fair, met a principal that shared my vision and had a good reputation. I knew to ask around before accepting a new position. I had an interview and was offered a teaching position during the voluntary transfer period. I worked under the leadership of this kind principal for 2 years.
Ms. Aydin, I'm
Yes,
a
sir.
little concerned. You're 2 minutes over your time, and
All right.
I'm
I will-
interested in what you're saying, but you've got easily another 6 minutes of testimony.
Okay. I will fast forward. Fast forward to working with this wonderful principal. My school was reassigned a new principal that was appointed to the school community. Upon the arrival of this new principal, the staff morale declined. There were also high numbers of teachers calling out, and this school began to be a revolving door for educators. This principal that started out at my new school, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, so bear with me for one moment. Had basically terminated, by the time it was her 4th year with DCPS, she terminated 98% of the original staff that was remaining. It took me 4 years of failed attempts under this principal to transfer to another DC public school. Upon having very successful interviews, I would reach out to the panel to see why I was not offered the job, and I would not receive any feedback, and even principals would decline to comment. Finally, it was one of the teachers that were on my panel that stated that they were unable to offer the job because of my principal reference. This was 2 years ago, where I was able to find a principal that took me on as a 3rd grade teacher. I couldn't figure out why someone with 2 master's degrees and 4 certifications from the Office of the State Superintendent of Education could not find a job. And I know that many of my colleagues were not as fortunate. Post Busra, Aydin, last year, this school lost 38% of their teaching staff during the 2021-2022 school year. Only 5 out of the 13 teachers went to another school, and 8 out of 13 teachers left DCPS altogether. I wanted to give you this feedback to give you some qualitative reasons as to why teachers are leaving the profession altogether, because they're unable to transfer schools because of their principal references, and also because sometimes 0.01 points can cost teachers $25,000 on their annual bonuses, and superintendents enable principals that go in and say clean up shop. While there may be ineffective educators, it's impossible to have a school with 98% of ineffective educators that need to go. My policy recommendations are to end mayor control of DC public schools and ensure that teachers receive a fair contract, and never allow teachers to work under an expired contract, because it speaks volumes about how much you value teachers. Teachers have not received a pay increase in 3 years, regardless of inflation. Please pay paraprofessionals at least $25 an hour, because long-term substitutes make more than they do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Aydin.